We have two live presenters, and that's Rita, who's president of the Australian BPD Foundation and extraordinary organiser of these wonderful opportunities for engagement in BPD during BPD Awareness Week. And she's joined by Jo Veltkamp, who piped up before, and Jo is a registered nurse. She has 40 years of experience, primarily interested in mental health. She's been at Spectrum for 19 years. Okay, and as I mentioned before, she's instrumental in helping to mentor our panelists of lived experience members who are joining Spectrum this year. Rita, as well as being president of the BPD Foundation, she's also the carer consultant at Spectrum, and I've had the pleasure of working with her for quite a few years now, and she's just an extraordinary bundle of energy. She does much more than any one person really has the right to ever be able to achieve, and she does it with such grace and such insight, and she's very, very wonderful to work with. So both Rita and Jo have been running workshops for families, carers, loved ones of people with BPD, and they're going to present some of the findings from the evaluation associated with these workshops. Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. So as Gillian says, I'm Rita, and I'm employed by Spectrum as a carer consultant. And Jo, would you like to, oh, Jo's already been introduced, but say hi, Jo.
Hi, I'm Jo, or Joanne on my screen. My role here today is to co-facilitate, as it is in the carer workshops. I say that because it is a lived experience presentation, and Rita has conceptualised and delivers the bulk of the information, and the sharing, facilitates the sharing between carers.
Thanks, Jo. So I'm aware that time seems to be disappearing really quickly. When I started work at Spectrum, I was given the brief of developing and facilitating workshops for carers, run from the lived experience perspective and supported by a clinician. So this morning we plan to give you a brief overview of the two short-term interventions that we've developed and preliminary results from the research conducted over 2 years. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about who is actually a carer. So we use the term carer to describe those who on a voluntary basis are actively involved in and caring for or about a person with a diagnosis of BPD. This may include a family member, a partner, spouse, friend, or other person. It may also include a young child supporting a parent or sibling. They may or may not live with the person they care for. Many carers do not identify as a carer and see themselves doing what a caring person does when they are supporting someone in distress. Many also feel the term carer provides too narrow a definition of the role, as often they walk a balance between supporting, caring for the person when they're unwell, whilst holding on to the hope for the person to become self-reliant. In the absence of a better word, we do use the terms carer or family interchangeably. As an aside, I personally do not like the term loved one. I know it's really popular. I feel it's quite enmeshing and implies there is a relationship when in fact there may be none. Also, to me, it's got quite a funereal tone. Whilst I do not wish to minimise the experiences of the person with BPD, families also experience significant challenges and distress, including stigma and consequential social isolation, similar to what the person with BPD experiences. In addition, many also find themselves under financial strain and poor physical health. Carers are often in survival mode, struggling to understand what is happening for their family member and at a loss of how to help or what to do. Their way of being in relationship may not be the most helpful. They're feeling overwhelmed, helpless, confused, anxious. Rather than being dismissed by services as part of the problem, they seek to develop an understanding of what's happening and why to learn some new skills. So how do people with the Participants describe their experiences, the roller coaster of extreme closeness and love, alternating with anger and wanting to have nothing to do with the person. A mixture of stress, powerlessness, resentment, social isolation, anger, confusion, fear, stigma, discrimination, and grief. Often experience mood, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorders, and lower levels of well-being occur at a higher rate for carers of people with BPD than they do for other serious mental health conditions. There's a lot of grief associated with it. It's often invisible and not named. And for when you care of someone with mental health issues, it's really complicated by the fact that the person we're grieving for is present and in pain. Around mental health professionals, the grief must be hidden. Otherwise, there's a risk of being labelled and your grief used to discount your standing. Your grief never goes away, it just continues to rise. So I'd just like to move briefly now onto the workshops. So the title, Learning More About BPD, is deliberate in that it suggests carers already come with a broad range of knowledge and experience, which we acknowledge. We aim to welcome a sharing of information in the space. Hopefully from the outset, the title speaks of sharing, listening, compassion, and inclusion. Sorry, there's a couple of questions. Oh, yes, if everyone agrees, the recording will be available. So we developed what we offered. We offered two various types of single session models, which incorporated breaks to optimise the processing of information and emotions, encouraged networking amongst participants, and opportunities to interact with Jo and myself. There's a full day workshop of 7 hours and an evening information session of about 2.5 hours. And the shorter sessions are an attempt to accommodate those who have daytime commitments and are unable to or don't want to attend a full day. During the breaks, Jo and I are available to chat, and most of the participants take up the opportunity to mingle and connect, and I think more importantly, with each other. To date, these workshops have been free, and we're currently offering modified sessions online. So we ask participants to complete pre and post-session questionnaires, an eKALM, which determines that persons are self-reported what they perceive as their knowledge of BPD to be, the Kessler K10 to measure psychological distress. Sorry about the language, the burden assessment scale, but this is what research scales are called, and a purpose-designed workshop satisfaction questionnaire. So that's the timeframes that it was offered. So I'm sure that everyone's familiar with what the National Mental Health Research Council's clinical guidelines recommends for helping people with BPD, partners and carers. So to gain a knowledge, helpful attitudes towards the person, non-blaming, encourage independence, develop helpful styles of communication, and partner in the work of health services. The main aim is to offer hope. So many people come to the sessions and they just don't know where to turn. And we really aim to offer them some hope in a safe space for carers to feel heard, and possibly for some the first time that they're actually able to openly share about what's happening in their lives. A non-judgmental space and an acknowledgement that everyone is doing the best they can. And that connection to other carers is really important part of the process, as well as some education, some psychoeducation and potentially even more what the participants share between themselves. So Joe and I quite often will step back and let someone else, one of the participants, share their experiences, their learning experiences of a particular event. And that seems to also resonate a lot with the participants. So I'm going to have to move on quite quickly. But I'll send out these slides. It's very important for Joe and I that we provide a warm and welcoming ambience, as non-clinical as we can make a clinical space. We talk a bit about the diagnosis, and we also really try and get the participants to think of some positive attributes they've noticed in the person with BPD. So most of them describe the person's compassionate, they're very creative, can be very empathetic. So it's just to try and encourage the carers to see that there is a struggling person behind the person that they're living with.
Rita, can I just add that we do that, we sort of model that between one another as well, and trying to reframe some of the language, flip the script if you like. And Rita and I interact in a way to provide some sort of experiential, and with the audience, experiential interpersonal skills live, really.
Yeah. We talk about self-harm and risk. I know there's often a reluctance from clinicians to talk openly about that. Joe, do you want to speak briefly to this slide?
Well, look, there's a lot there, Rita. Generally, we promote a deeper understanding and a compassionate sort of way to advocate and for the person, and how the carer might be able to influence their support, and how they might be available to the person without, you know, letting their own desires get in their way. So trying to explain a little bit more about the function of self-harm, whether the person's wanting to change that or whether it's the carer that's wanting to change that, and if so, how, and how to sort of work with rather than do to the person. Part of our presentation involves a bit of a clinical perspective, and that's where I come in, trying to explain a little bit about why people might be misdiagnosed in the first place. Also, some of the treatment approaches and the rationale for those. With that, I have to do a little bit of talk on what Spectrum can, and more about what they can't offer as well, and to promote the fact that there are lots of clinicians and treatment options alternative to talking therapies as well, and that there are other clinicians outside of Spectrum services that can provide the right service, but how to find that right fit for the person too. So yeah, we talk a lot about carers looking after themselves and modelling that self-care for the other person, and really managing themselves in the interaction, and that's really all that they can do in supporting the other person. So we do use the analogy of the aeroplane host or hostess providing oxygen for themselves in the case of a crisis before they're able to provide some to another. So looking after yourself to sustain yourself in the relationship with the other person and in your support role.
Yeah. And we also provide quite a range of resources and further opportunities for the people to seek further information for themselves. Just some common questions and discussion points that seem to be really popular during the sessions. So lots of questions around relationship management, a lot of frustrations around how long it's taken to receive a diagnosis, on the whole, I would say that participants feel that the person receiving a diagnosis has been helpful. It's helped them to understand what's actually happening within the family and give them a basis on what to try and do something, and to hopefully access some services like the workshop. Just some aha moments. At Spectrum, we like to describe, be interested in what the lived experience people feel of the analogy. It's like driving a car with a hypersensitive accelerator and poor brakes. And I take that analogy a little bit further, and the role of the clinician is to be the supervising driver, not to take over driving that car, but to help the person to learn how to drive it. And for families to be the supervising driver, to help them build up their number of hours, to be an environment that the person can practice their skills in. Marley, I'm sure you'll have some comments about that one. The role function of self-harm. For people, feeling suicidal may actually be a survival strategy, and for the person with BPD, and just focusing on suicidality when the person is craving a connection may in fact be detrimental. It's not about the nail, which I'm sure you said on YouTube. So yeah, and these are some postcards from the BPD Awareness Week last year. So just very briefly, the workshop participant demographics, the majority are parents, and most of them are in the age of 51 plus. So the age range of participants, we discourage children from attending. We don't have control over stories that are told in the space. So we encourage attendees to be over 18, but the age range of people that the participants are supporting has ranged from about 10 to, I think, 80. So there's a huge range of relationships and support. eKALM, so care and mental health, and I'll just move on to the conclusions. They travelled further for the day session than the information session. A number travelled from interstate. Quite a few travelled up to 300 Ks just to attend the session. They reported significantly improved knowledge and attitudes. A reduction in perceived burden was statistically significant in the workshop, but not so much in the information session, which isn't surprising. And those who attended the workshop reported a small decrease in mental health symptoms, but that's unlikely to be clinically significant. Just a little bit of feedback. Lots of comments about the kinship, safe space, non-judgmental and vulnerability, informative, the shared perspective, really probably top of the people's list. And I think that I might wrap up there, and I'm just aware that if Marley's presentation is still to come, so unless there's any really burning questions, I'll send out the slides and people can email me with any questions that they may have.
Thank you so much, Rita and Joe. It's a marvellous program. I had the pleasure of actually looking through a lot of the open text comments that people wrote on the evaluation forms, and they all really appreciated the opportunity to come together and share and experience what it's like from another person's perspective. They're not alone in trying to help and support and also cope with their person with BPD. One of the big questions is, can we keep meeting? Because a lot of them form quite good bonds, especially I think in the day-long workshops. They were really quite keen to keep the contact up and keep supporting each other. So I think it's a fantastic initiative. And yes, it is online now. And I think we're having a little chat about that beforehand, which means we can offer it more broadly across Australia as well, rather than just people who can come to Melbourne.